Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we're going to talk about two issues that seemingly have nothing to do with each other, but we'll see. Maybe they do have something to do with each other. And our guest has been researching both of these issues, so maybe he'll be able to explain to us how we can make this connection. The first issue is what we've been seeing since October 7th. Anti-Semitism, Jewish students being harassed on college campuses, and not just Jewish students. My family are regulars, probably know I grew up in New York, so outside of Jewish restaurants, kosher restaurants, people protesting, seemingly has nothing to do with Israel. You can't say it's anti-Zionist protesting outside a kosher deli, and things like that. And the second issue will be the economy in Israel and whether we can come out here. I'm in Israel. Our guest will soon introduce him, but whether Israel's economy can withstand what's been happening in the past 3 years. I'm saying 3 years because we've been going through crazy times here since the government, and even before, announced the judicial reform, the mass protests, a lot of businesses leaving, businesses that don't want to come close to countries that have this kind of turmoil. So our guest is Professor Barak Orbach. Professor Orbach is a Robert M. Mundheim, so said it right, Barak? Professor of Law and Business at the University of Arizona. His primary areas of expertise are antitrust, corporate governance, and regulation. He does articulate and study the intersection between business and law. And so I guess it's weird, but maybe not so weird, that Barak started writing a paper on anti-Semitism on campus pretty much right after October 7th. And we're talking off camera about why he felt the need to do so. And maybe I'll let Barak just, first of all, I'll tell you that it's a pleasure to have you here. And
Thank
secondly,
you.
can you explain to us why, what you saw after October 7th on college campuses? You're known on campuses where you're a known figure. What did you see that made you so that you felt the need to write this and check what was happening around you?
Okay, so let's go back to October 7th. So on October 7th, I was actually on a flight from Europe to the back to the US. And while on the plane, my brother started sending me videos that were already going on Telegram. I think that was already 7:30 a.m. Israel time.
Hmm.
And I was quite shocked. So it was clear to me that it was really bad. Of course, nobody could figure out the magnitude. And but by the time I go to the US, and this is a long flight, I already got a few text messages from friends asking family, etc. And coming from Israel, I thought that something really bad happened, and just as being this is life in where we come from. But the change that happened was that in October 8th, student association started issuing statements, and many of us, when I say us, I mean Israelis in the academic institutions mostly, out of the sudden, people ghosted us.
Yeah.
So it was quite shocking. And I'm not talking about ordinary, I mean, someone I don't, people who ghost you are friends. It's not otherwise, you don't.
Could you give us
So,
maybe just a few examples, like just in general, like a friend of yours suddenly stops talking to you, just suddenly?
yeah, so a very, very good friend. I wouldn't say a friend, a very good friend. I know as someone I regularly met for lunches, we texted almost daily. October 8th, bing, ghosted me. Uh, I sent him a few texts. He has not replied. And then, we have mutual friends. They told him something, and he got back to me. But the texts were cold. We're no longer friends. And the avatar is now a watermelon, which that's a statement when you send it to an Israeli. And again, this is not a person who is related to the Middle East by any stretch of imagination. So this is just his political views. Now, this is my strongest personal experience. I had similar ones. I can get back to them in a moment. But more importantly for me is I have a son who is a teenager. His best friend was a kid whom they met in preschool, so that they were 3 or 4, and this was the only time they were in the same school. They were best friends, and he come from a Palestinian family. And his family, the family of the friend, told him, instructed him to terminate the relationship with my son. So again, so that for like, again, we're talking about kids and best friends, families know. I mean, we knew them. I mean, we met often. We love their kids. We love their kids. So again, for a child, when child experiences it, it's very, very different. And I truly, Israelis always ask you, do you have any anti-Semitism? Did you experience anti-Semitism? And I've always said no, which was, I did not understand. And then other things started happening on campus, student statements, and protest, other people vanished, or people who try to express support ask weird questions such as, or made statements such as, it is not your fault that you are the product of the genocidal Zionist project. So, this is kind of, these are supportive individuals, okay? So
That's the
the notion,
support.
yeah,
I can
that is,
imagine who doesn't support. Exactly.
so again, the notion that people, people describe me as a product of the genocidal Zionist project, that was painful. And I would say the following: we don't the way we use the word Zionist in Israel has changed over time, and it acquired a secondary meaning, which is more political. Eh, I so for me at that time, at least, I did not attribute to it any significance. But the word genocide for my generation, I should for any generation it should be. But again, I grew up with Holocaust survivors, and it was different. So for me, don't use the word genocide unless there's so it was really difficult in that sense. It was really, really difficult that the genocide, and then it also came with other anti-Semitic metaphors or symbols such as capitalism, etc. Now, I'm a person who does business law. I'm a capitalist. I film, and then when students started talking about the links between Zionist and capitalism, that we control and influence everything, that was a little bit troubling. Now again, I was in the early October. We all saw the videos. I think that every normal human being was emotionally affected. And no disrespect to these kids, they have not seen anything. They have their own view, and they're very confident. Um, students in what I taught in the fall 2 classes. In one of my classes, more students stopped showing up. The other
Because
classes was the
wait,
other class.
they stopped showing up because you were an Israeli? Is that the you're sure that
Well,
that was
I
the
would
reason?
okay. So uh, our students in my school issued a statement, and it was along the lines of what I said. Actually, it went much further. Explicitly say that there's no right for existence to Israel, etc. And there were other things which are quite horrible. And they issued it on the morning. My class started at 10:30. I talked with my dean and the university president. I told them, you either denounce it before I get into class, or after class, you'll have to deal with the students. I got into class and I told them exactly what I thought
Uh-huh.
about the statement. So it was a drama. I felt that it was inevitable, so that I could not get into class without saying anything. And I still think that was, perhaps I could have articulated myself better, but I was furious. And I told them what happened on October 7th. So this we're talking about November 7th.
Wow.
And after that, it turned out that some of the people who wrote the statement were in one of my classes. And they and then they invented conspiracy theories that I will sabotage their careers, etc. Which professors don't do such thing. I mean, I have other things in life. Setting aside that I will not do that, but you're not that important. So, there was a need for the university to figure out what to do with students who have such concerns. And so the arrangement was that that I would record my classes and students were allowed not to come.
Uh-huh.
And if they had questions and they felt uncomfortable to ask me, they would ask them through the associate dean. And the other thing is that after they get the letter grade, they could choose between pass fail, which I found extremely offensive and problematic. Again, I you choose your battles. I accepted it as it is. So what happened with that arrangement In one of my classes, the overwhelming majority of the students stopped coming to class. On the other, from the opposite side, in the other class, the attendance was like never before, and the student went above and beyond to express sympathy and support. I mean, they were extraordinary in terms of expressing support. So again, it's the same school. The notion of it's just kind of the random distribution of students in the
Yeah.
classroom. But
Can
again,
I, Barak,
go ahead.
before you could,
Go
I
ahead.
want to ask a question just to maybe maybe just get to why you felt the need to write it and you're explaining. But one
So,
thing that I found interesting was I was just in New York City a few months, like 2 months ago, and my father lives in Brooklyn and my aunt lives in Manhattan near NYU in the Village. And I found it so interesting that when you walk in Brooklyn, in not in the yuppie areas, I mean in the more working class, not mostly not college educated people, regular people, plumbers, construction workers, policemen, firemen, the support for Israel is through the roof. People, when I was everybody was excited to meet me, the friends of my father, but even just people on the street that we happen to meet. The conversation goes, "You're from Israel. Wow, how you guys doing? How is it there? We support you, this and that." You go to NYU, Columbia, whatever. We met Jewish students at Columbia too. The stories are worse than what you're saying now. People were actually beaten up, hit, classes. People were being blocked from entering their classes. And I think what's very, very weird, and I spoke with Professor God Sad, which is he's a different opinion than you on other things, but I think one of the things that we can agree on is that this is a uniquely academic phenomenon. Meaning
absolutely.
meaning that the old anti-Semitism when I grew up in America was you had these skinheads, everybody knew they were disgusting, crazy people, they had no place in polite society. But now it's specifically the more educated, the more academic, the elites that are bringing out this hatred, and it's a holier than thou hatred, meaning they hate, but they think they're doing good through their hate.
So, okay, so let me define it more clearly.
Yes.
I would say that October 7 was created an identity crisis for the overwhelming majority of Jews in America and much more so for Israelis.
Yes.
Until October 7, 23, I was always extraordinarily proud of being Israeli. And I've always felt that it was, if anything, it was to my benefit. You know, I was in 8200, you know, in the business sector, everyone knows the unit. There's always been kind of a pride to be, you know, I said, you know, I was proud of my military service, etc. Out of the sudden, this change. Now, I live in two environment. I live in the business environment. I do a lot of work in the private sector. I think that most of my friends are actually probably lawyers and executives, fewer academics. But I am an academic, and I have many academics friends, and I'm deeply embedded in the university. And what happened is that I faced, you know, kind of a serious disconnect because for a long time I've worked with on the business side on diversity and inclusion, and I've always thought that DEI in academic institution is just like corporate DEI, and I was wrong about it, deeply wrong about it. So out of the sudden, you figure out that your environment is actually includes a considerable anti-Semitism. Unlike you, you're born in the U.S. and grew up here, Israelis generally do not have that sense of anti-Semitism. So after October 7, this week after, I called many of my Jewish friends, American Jewish friends, and I had to apologize because they've always been telling me about anti-Semitism, and I told them they're paranoid.
Mm.
And they were right. Well, perhaps they're not perfectly right, but I did not appreciate the depth of that and the prevalence, especially in the university, especially in the left. I was very dismissive of anti-Semitism on the left. So it was an absolutely an identity crisis. And you do feel betrayed because you walk on, and I think that's probably the major thing for most Americans, most Jews and Israelis in America are generally liberals. And that's our values. And you feel betrayed by the community you thought shared your own value. And then it turned out it's really, as you said, it's structured, normalized, intellectualized. The intellectualization of anti Semitism was particularly annoying and hurtful Okay, so again, I'm old enough to be established. I don't have insecurities about intellectualism or knowledge. I don't need any students to lecture me about history, let alone faculty or something like that. It was bad. And again, I was, for other reasons, I was really fortunate. I had good relationship with university leadership. On October 8th, the university president called me to ask how I was doing, and he sent a correction email to his statement that was neutrality. He condemned strongly both the SJP, the Student for Justice in Palestine, and every. So he moved forward very strongly. So in that sense, I felt very. I was safe, but the university president, for example, asked all his lieutenants to call me to ask how they can support me. The DEI director, a woman I know, called me and said, "Well, I was asked to do that. Big mistake. You shouldn't say that you asked to do that." And she said, "What can I do for you?" And I told her, I just want you to say that we have a problem of anti-Semitism and that you do something about it. I don't ask you to do anything." And she said, "I disagree." And this is where things started getting really bad. So I said, "Well, what are you going to do for me if you cannot do that?" She said, "Well, perhaps I can reserve a room for you and the other Jews." It's, "Oh, can you be a little bit more anti-Semitic?" And this is the DI director, yes. And then I, when this protest started, again, there were conspiracy theories. So I was accused that I was among that I have the president here or the chief safety officer here, and I persuaded them to crash the protest. And I don't have the ears, and it's different here than in New York.
Yeah.
So again, it was I would say identity crisis in the sense that, well, on the one hand, the universe you lived in is different than what you thought. You reflect on past conversations, past interactions. You said, "Gosh, I did not understand that." And I'm in my mid-50s. I So many conversations, so many interactions. I said, I in my head, "Gosh, I didn't understood. I didn't understand that." So in that sense, it is horrible. Then again, for me, and this is somewhat political, for me, I don't think, it's identity crisis also in terms of what happened in Israel. So some of the things that, some of the voices, I freak me out. I mean, this is not who I am, and this
Yes.
is not who I think that many people said. I'm happy that my grandparents don't see that.
Mhm.
Did not live
Let's
to see
go
it.
in about Israel. I'm going to talk to you later, so we'll critique what's happening in Israel, but so we'll go subject by subject. But I want to also just understand something that is obvious to me, but I think needs to be pointed out is that the whole DI structure, at the end of the day, once you in the universities mostly, once you like layer upon layer, what does it come down to? If, as I understand it, is that white people basically are bad and Jews and need to be basically minorities who are disadvantaged need to be put on a pedestal above the white people. That's just the way I know that other people look at it, but that's a matter of fact how it's been used. Maybe the people in the beginning thought about it differently. And so what happens is that Jews are considered white. Why are they considered white? That's just the way, again, you tell me your opinion in a few minutes, but they're considered white because they're successful. And so, what just like Asian Americans, we all know the famous Harvard Supreme Court case. Harvard was and I think Penn were refusing to accept Asian students with the same grades as blacks or Hispanic students with the top grades because they were Asian and they were more successful. And the black and Hispanic student needs to be helped out, so to speak, on their expense. And so, what I think is very weird is that we've always heard that racism is bad, and it's so bad to be against people because of their race and to look at a whole race of people in a certain way and to paint a broad brush. And then you look at a certain group and you say, oh, that's a successful group and therefore they're bad. Therefore, you know, I even heard the Judith Butler, the head of the queer
No, which
movement
is
in the world, like the top leader, the prophet. She actually said that Hezbollah and Hamas are feminist organizations because they promote the the fight against the privileged white people in Israel and whatever she said. It's all like you said, intellectualizing stupidity. So maybe give us you like you said, you thought
Okay.
DEI was the same. What did you do? You agree with what I said about college DEI?
I generally agree, but I think I would like to emphasize it. So for me, and I think many others in my area, there's also a sharp contrast because on the corporate side, we've been working. I got into corporate culture, I think in 2012 or something like that. And with things that happened in the United States, it worked well. And I worked on the I project for corporate sides and corporate culture and corporate side. And there, the point is that every person should feel included in the sense that unhappy people are not productive
Yes,
employees.
exactly.
and if people don't get along, they don't work well in teams. So my experience until October 23 is purely positive. And I foolishly did not appreciate what you've just said, that academic DI is radically different. Now, what I have learned very quickly in October 23, that academic DI is all about the underrepresented and underprivileged.
Yes.
So, and through these lenses, Jews are far worse than ordinary whites
Okay, we're
because
worse.
we are much worse than ordinary whites because we are overrepresented in
Yes.
powerful sectors, including the academia. So the percentage of Jews in America is 2.2%, something like that. In top universities, it used to be 20 and even more. Now it's less, but it's a significant multiplication of our percentage. So we're overrepresented. And again, looking at numbers, Jews as a group, the average income in the United States is there's no other group that has such income, average income. Yes. So it turned out that, all these kind of symbols of control, overrepresentation. So if you're overrepresented, it means that it comes at the expense of underrepresented.
Yes.
And again, and in my experience until October 23 was mostly positive with minorities, and because as a foreigner in the United States, you become more humble. You understand what it means to be different.
Mhm.
And again, I've done a lot of work in this area. So for me, it was an identity crisis. Hey, this is what I've done. You're not a person who does actually include diversity and
Professor
inclusion.
Orbach, one I want to ask you as an economist, as a professor that studies the economy, the markets. It seems to me also another like preposition supposition of DEI culture is that any difference of outcome must be attributed to racism or any other types of discrimination. So if white people or Jews, for example, make more on average, earn more than blacks, it must mean that the whites are taking from the blacks. That is that's basically what you just said. And so, as an economist, it's a dumb question, but I think it has to be said. As an economist, if you just look purely on all economic theory, maybe except for Marxism, which I don't think is economic theory. It's more of a religion. But if you look on, I know people in the academy might be angry at what I just said, some of them. But if you look at economic studies theories, is there any proof that that is true?
No, actually, this is not even a question. The point about economics is generating value,
Exactly.
and it's not a zero-sum game that you have a fixed set of resources, and now you fight over them. So, in theory, if we had a fixed set of resources over which we are fighting, the stronger would have getting anything the strong has comes at the expense of the person in a
Yes.
less favorable position. In reality, in our time, which perhaps was different in the past, you become wealthy if you generate value, a lot of value, and you capture a portion of it. So there's not even, it's not even close to be. I mean, this
So
is
what
not
you're
even a
saying is that
conversation.
DEI is anti-science in the universities.
In that sense, yes. So again, in that sense, and it's not what kind of disciplines are kind of particularly engaged in that. Okay, so and why I was so ignorant about it because in my environment nobody talked like that,
Exactly.
and I'm in a law school, so there are people in the law school who are not business oriented. I'm less interested in what they do. I do not go to their talks or something like that. But perhaps in hindsight, perhaps I should have. But these are disciplines which, again, are less from my perspective, and I have respect to all of them. But what I do has to have an impact on reality. If it doesn't, I feel that I don't do much. I don't. What my work is irrelevant. And again, if you're in English, sociology, etc., your work might be amazing, but this is where it comes from. And talking about economics, distribution of wealth, exploitation, etc., without any economic understanding, and it's not even economic understanding; it's deep the indoctrination
Yes.
of a very, very black and white distinctions, such as oppressed and oppressors.
Hmm.
Uh, Colonialism is the source of all evil, settlers, etc. So again, every nation has its dark past, and the United States is no distinction. Whites in America telling Israelis about colonialism and settlements, that's a little bit extreme. I mean,
Yes.
go back to where you come from. So again, you're absolutely right. And as I said, in hindsight, I feel like an idiot that I did not understand that before October 7.
Lastly, Professor Orbach, on this subject, just looking forward, are you optimistic that it seems to me that one of the things that I'm not going to get into politics of America because it's not the topic of our conversation, but I do want to say that one of the things that we did see in the election was that both sides understood that at the end of the day, most Americans don't want to hear this crap. So what happened was both the Harris campaign and the Trump campaign, obviously, but the Harris campaign understood, and we hear now from the people that are going to the media after, is that they realized that identity politics wasn't working, and so they needed to come with a more unifying message. And also they realized that all this like race, for example, she never spoke about race because she realized it didn't play well even in the black community, and all this kind of stuff, the oppressor versus oppressed, attacking the system, and all this language that we've been alluding to. They realize that most people in America, like we said, most people aren't academics in America. Most people still don't go to university in America. So this is a uniquely academic phenomenon, and I think a lot of the academy is starting to realize that they're out of step and something bad is going on. So do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I would say that it's not even academia. It's a subsegment it's a
Yes,
sector within the academic. So, your description about your experiences, most people are sympathetic, even if they are critical of Israel. I'm not the government of Israel, and
exactly.
I do have family in Israel. So my experience with most individuals were positive, actually. But you did not expect to see that, and it is a small group of people concentrated in academic centers who were very, very vocal and used the tools of social activism that in the United States are not tools to address them. And they created this noise. Now, I think that they do not have the support of the majority of the population, but we should not have any
Discount.
delusions. We should not
Yeah,
have any delusions. Israel has experienced a significant reputational harm over the past since October. Significant reputational harm. It will take us many years to fix that. And talking about anti-Semitism, one thing if it's about Israel, but it is associated with Jews.
exactly.
And so, again, anti-Zionism, the notion that Israel doesn't have the right to exist, you know, at the very least, everyone knows that there are people who think this way. And once people think this way, the idea is normalized. Before October 7, people were afraid, did not talk like that in public because there would have been consequences. Now it's normalized. So yes, it is a small sector. The backlash was significant. I think that the Democratic Party had a few other things other than anti-Semitism. Their
Right.
economic agenda was off. But as you know, I always tell friends here, we have a long way ahead of us, and the recovery will take many, many years.
Yes, I agree. But also, I think we should note that if you, I just one thing that I'll say, and then I'll ask you about Israel because it's our second topic. But I just say that I remember in the Democratic convention, Joe Biden said at one point that the protesters outside had a point. And I think, and I was looking at this. Joe Biden used to be like he used to call himself I think he still does, a Zionist. And why did he feel the need to say that the protesters who were shouting some of them slogans of Hamas had a point? And the reason everybody gave to me, people that I know in the Democrat Party, was they're scared they're going to lose Michigan and some other places, and I think they now need to realize that by placating to this small section of radicals in these 2, 3 states, they lost other people. They came across as not having principles and just, you know, sucking up to bad actors, and people that are in the middle and don't have a strong opinion to here to there, so that they were not just the Palestinians, but to other groups that they didn't have strong stances. And that I think was one of the lessons that they'll be learning. They are trying to learn lessons. They have to win at some point. So I think that's one of the lessons that they should learn. That's my opinion. So now I'm going to go to Israel.
Hold on,
So
let me just add a
yeah,
point here, and which is I think important. There's never been a president in the United States who was more supportive of Israel than Biden, and any other description will just be factually incorrect. And it is just Biden is the most Zionist president ever. He is not a, I cannot, there are many things I can criticize, but not that point. What you describe is correct, but it's not only just because of Michigan. It's because the culture in the United States that if people speak or people express pain, they must have something. So it's a little bit broader than that. It's not
yes,
about, it's about, even people who do not anti-Semite said, oh, let them express themselves.
right.
So this was necessary for the Democrats at that point. Do the Democrats a lot of cleanup to do? Absolutely. Anti-Semitism is concentrated there, but it's not the only issue in America.
Obviously,
Anti-Semitism.
I agree. But also, I'll just say that one of the things that hey, we keep on saying, I'll just say, but
Yeah.
one last thing about this is that Americans need to make Americans, everybody needs the difference between freedom of speech and saying that what the person is saying, he has the right to say it, let them speak, but what they're speaking is abhorrent and evil. So I think you can say, I remember Skokie with the Nazis, neo-Nazis doing their, their march in Skokie in Illinois, and the Supreme Court said they have the right to do it, but everybody knew that what they were doing was evil, that they were Nazis. And the same thing, like people who are, holding up the Houthi flag, that their slogan is "Kill all the Jews" and "Death to America." So I think that there's the Americans. A lot of times, everybody has a point, their truth, our truth. Sometimes there's just the truth. That's now.
Oh, sorry to add something.
Yeah.
One of anti-Semitism is more than two components, but two important components are a conspiracy theory,
Yes.
the control, etc., and the other is a double standard that we are subject to double standards. The freedom of speech applies to government action in public spaces.
Exactly.
This is not even, true for public universities, and I'm in a public university. So what we have seen is that the rules applying to freedom of speech were not applied in this context. And the notion that people talk about freedom of speech, you know what, again, I know enough about the freedom of speech. No, what you're talking is nonsense.
Exactly.
I wrote the rules here. And, and it's kind of, no, there are rules. And the double standard, this is, I think, the major thing that ticked off people in the United States.
It's so weird also. Now I have to say something. It's so weird that you had in a lot of, I don't know about your university, but in a lot of universities in the US, this whole microaggression thing where students, you just said like a small thing to student, you sometimes didn't even mean it. I have a friend who's a professor, I don't want to say where and what. He was accused of like being this like monster because he said something offhand. He's an older guy. He didn't even realize he was saying something that offended someone. You had professors that read poetry that was done during the slave era. They were teaching poetry, and they got a black student got offended because this poetry was written during the slave, something with the slave trade, and the teacher was just teaching poetry, but he got into trouble because one student was offended, and then the university professors, like you wrote in your in the article that you wrote, they come to Congress and they try to defend this by citing free speech. The universities have zero free speech on like micro small stuff, and then the double standard is blatant.
This
And
is the microaggression is the double standard. We
yes,
have to be excessively cautious about everything
except
but
for
Jews.
Jews. Exactly.
Again, for me, that's the anti-Semitism. Period.
Oh, okay. So now, now that we covered all that, I want to go to Israel because you are an Israeli. You live in Arizona, but you do obviously you have family here and friends, and you know what's happening. You follow what's happening. We've texted, so I know that you have a keen interest in what's happening here. So let me first start. We had a year of these judicial. Some people here call it a reform. Other people call it a how do you say mapecha, a revolution. Um, uh, to me, it doesn't even matter at the end because the result was the same, meaning that the what to me what I realized, what I live next to in Petah Tikva, a city in Israel, and I live 2 blocks from the former Attorney General Mandelblit. I don't know, our English listeners, viewers might not know, but he was the Attorney General. He's the one that basically signed off on putting the prosecution on Netanyahu, the cases that are now in court. And we've been regular protested for in our streets next to here for there's been protests every Saturday night for like 6, 7 years, maybe even more, 8 years already, um, from both sides. So in the beginning, when he was thinking of doing the prosecutions, the indictments, there was protests from people that hate Netanyahu. Then there was protests for people who love Netanyahu against Mandelblit. Then there was protests from both people. And then during the judicial thing from all of 2023, 20, no, 22, 20, January 22, I think it was,
January
23.
23.
Yeah, so
So
all
I was
that.
in Israel.
Oh, you were there at the beginning.
I was in Israel in December, January. So yeah.
So you start, but what I think was interesting is that what I mean that it doesn't matter is that even before the judicial reform, a lot of people, especially I would say the secular, and not even secular, but the more academic, find people who are making the big money in Israel, people who are working and letting the economy go, people who we need here if we want the country to function, were feeling more and more anxious about where the country was headed. Even before this was like the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, of this feeling. So I remember when after the elections, which we had after like 7 elections, there's the coalition talks and the ultra-Orthodox parties, there was leaks. What they were demanding: free electricity generators for all of Bnei Brak, the city of the ultra-Orthodox. They were demanding that in the law of return, they would be taken out the where your grandfather is Jewish, so you could become Israeli, take out that, and all these different things. People started getting, continued getting, like, where is this country going? And then the judicial stuff happened, which was like, oh my God, this is really happening. And so I felt like I don't even care if some of the stuff with the judicial stuff, I agreed. I felt like we're destroying ourselves from within. Like this was, you know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely. But I don't see all things like you. So
go for it.
one thing, and I think that many people in my generation in the United States, or let's say my circles, I we feel is that we did not fully appreciate the significance of democracy, and we took democracy for granted as we grew up. Democracy flourished from the Second World War, and then we've started seeing a decline from the late 90s, statistically speaking. And it took us time to accept that. Democracy in many countries is at risk, in Israel as well. Israel has additional factors. So again, talking about corporate America, right now, boardrooms talk about, well, we do not have capitalism without democracy. We have to protect it. So the aspect I do not agree with you is the essence, the nature of the reform. The nature of the reform was an attack on democracy. This does not mean that the Supreme Court should not be criticized. This does not mean that there should be improvement. That's always true. But there's a big difference between correcting reform and demolishing democracy. So when I was in Israel in December 22, January 23, I was quite, I do not live in Israel. I get updates less frequently. This was, for me, it was connected to the threat to democracy. It's a big deal. Now, connecting it to the other component, we have in Israel two sectors whose growth is faster than the growth of the productive sectors.
Yes.
And just in terms of algebra, growth like that cannot last forever.
Can't
There
work.
will be this party will end, and it seems to get close to the end. That you need more and more money to feed these sectors, and they keep growing. That will not continue. Period. That's not. This
Wait,
is just
just to explain
algebra.
to people who aren't Israeli, you mean the ultra-Orthodox Haredi, what's called in Israel, the ultra-Orthodox sector, who doesn't go to the army, 50% doesn't obviously go to, most of them do not study don't even study high school diplomas or any math or English or anything like that. And about 50% of males do not even work during their whole right now as we speak. Able-bodied men, women work, but mostly in educational fields. So it's not something that's spurring the economy, so to speak. And then I think the second sector you're probably talking about is the Arab sector, right?
No, actually, no. I was talking
Who?
about the settlers.
Okay.
Okay, I was talking about the settlers.
That what?
This is a population that also grows faster.
Uh-huh.
It's also a population that is heavily subsidized by
Yes.
Israeli taxpayers.
Mhm.
And it's a population that, again, in my mind, has a toxic effects on the direction of Israel. I mean, everyone is entitled to have his own views, but at the end of the day, there is also reality. Something has to give. You will not get everything, and some things will remain. And the notion that that the Palestinians will vanish one day, that's a weird idea. It will not happen.
Mhm.
We are stuck with them, whether we like it or not, and we need to reach some solution. And it will be, and solutions of these kinds are compromised. And each party doesn't get exactly what it wants, and that will be the case here as well. So we're talking about two sectors that have strong demands, tend to have significant influence on the coalition, whatever the coalition might be in
The
Israel.
current coalition for the past, except for a break of about a year, for the past
But but
2009. So
nobody would describe nobody, but we do not Israel does Israel doesn't have really left. Okay, so Israel
not anymore. Yeah.
yeah, in the conceptual terms, Israel is their center, etc. But the notion that you have large sectors that keep growing, they do not participate in the workforce, they do not
Mhm.
participate in production, and productivity is generating value. If you are raising goats in the West Bank, that's not generating value. That doesn't really contribute to the GDP.
Mhm.
If you are working in high tech, it does contribute to the GDP. And if you're working in a restaurant, you contribute to the GDP or in a supermarket. So we're talking about sectors that do not contribute to the GDP. In terms of education, they take us back or they do not develop and they become a liability in terms of financial liability to the country. People may not like hearing that. This is just economics.
Well, I
And
think that even they themselves. So one of the things that's interesting is that people say things in front of the camera or on the record very different than what they'll say behind the scenes. So when you spoke to like an ultra orthodox member of Knesset, a lot of times he'll say, "You're right," behind the scenes. You're right. It can't continue like this. We need to change. We're changing already. Things are changing. And then when he's being interviewed, he'll say, "We can't change anything. The Torah is keeping us." So I think behind the scenes they know the people who are in public life or yeah, but they're I think a lot of times addicted to the way, it's very hard to change. And when you're indoctrinating people into a certain lifestyle over and over and over, it's gonna crash because there won't be enough money at some point.
and in Israel, like in any other countries, many politicians are practical, but they are stuck with their base.
Yes,
If they created that base, they radicalized the base for the votes, and now they cannot change their views because the base they are afraid of
right.
infuriating the base. Actually, a few months ago, the office of one of the ministers in the Israeli government called me to ask whether I would be willing to talk with him about a international outreach or how do we improve the position. It was not the minister who's in charge of
Sounds
the
like Israel.
diaspora. Yeah, but so of course I said yes, and then I started talking. Well, I started talking with that individual, with the minister, and it turned out that whatever he understands, there's a massive gap between his understanding and what his willingness to say in public.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, I want to. So those are the two main issues with the Israeli economy, and I think in general, from your perspective, I would say that just to push back maybe a little bit, and I want to get on to the next issue, but I'll just give you my. I think in general, since October 7th, especially, but I think that on the ultra orthodox issue, there's consensus from whoever's not ultra orthodox in Israel that something must be done among the public, not the politicians. They're just trying to. We're seeing now they're trying to just stay in power no matter what. But I'm saying among the public, there's a majority of people say something needs to give. But on the settler issue, most Israelis became more right wing in their opinions on the Palestinian issue. So especially since October 7th, but even before that. So um, I would say just in general, if you're an Israeli who thinks like you think and lives here, I would say let's take one problem at a time. And first, you have a problem that there's a consensus among a lot of the people that can be tackled. I disagree with you on the settler issue mostly, but
It's fine.
as someone who used to live in a settlement, but obviously someone who's herding a goat is someone who most settlers don't herd goats. I would say that there is a sector among the settlers, and I did a few episodes on this. I think it's really, really disgusting that some of the leaders of the settlers are scared or unwilling, or they feel that if they condemn people who destroy property, act in violent ways, that somehow they're giving the other side ammunition when it's exactly the opposite. If you want to prove to people that the settlements are good and that it's a good, worthwhile cause and that Israel should be doing it, that is the first thing you should be doing. You should be showing how peaceful you are, how that you're letting the. So that's just
Let,
that's
let me
my
refine. Let me let, no, no, let me refine. So I agree with not everything, but some of the thing, and I want to refine something I said. That one of the problems is that we use words are not precise, and we use language, and it doesn't capture everything. So in Israel, we refer to religious and settlers, datiim and mitnachlim,
yeah.
and these are very large public groups, massive groups, and no, and not all of them are bad. Many of them are amazing, and many of them are amazing citizens. And but they are bundled together. So I agree with you in the sense that this bundling kind of impact the radical elements in these sectors projects on other members of these sectors, and in a way that people like me, when we talk, we are not careful enough because you cannot start intellectualizing everything and
No,
get
but
into
also
discussion.
Professor Orbach, I agree with you, but and I don't take issue with that. I'll just say that the settlements is such a broad term also, the settlements themselves, not just the settlers. So for example, Modi'in Elit is a city that's ultra orthodox, Haredi. It's not settlers with that you usually imagine. Beitar Elite is all Haredi. And I think also that we talk about a two-state solution at some point. A lot of these cities are going to be staying anyway in Israeli control. A lot of them, the Gushei Teshuvah, what they call the settlement blocks, depending on what plan you are and what person you talk to. But a lot of it, there is a consensus, even among some of the American diplomatic people who were working on this for years, that there'll have to be concessions, like you said, on both sides. So a lot of the settlements are in places that in any deal will probably stay in Israeli control. And so there also has to be, I think, a dissection between someone who lives in like a city like Beitar or Gush Etzion, which was Israel before even 48, and someone who lives in like some like hilltop, just sitting there all alone, surrounded by Palestinian villages. So I think also on that point, we should just, when we're talking about the issue, and getting deep into it, not just saying so that's we should be also talking about that.
Let me just say one thing, that the notion of any deal will, these kind of statements are a little bit strong. You're in a position to dictate your terms so long as you have power.
Yes.
And at this trajectory, Israel is losing power fast. So, to the extent that Israel want to have terms like the terms you defined or others, you you have to act wisely and not to be on a suicidal path.
Yes, I agree with that.
And so, what you said is right now correct. Will it be correct 2 years from now? I cannot tell you. So, to be in a position for a deal, you better have power. And I don't think that the present government maintains power.
Yes, that I think people who are on the right wing or the left wing should agree. That should be a consensus here at all in general. Let me ask you about one of the things we've been listening to. I'm throwing at you different stuff on the economy because that's your main field, and law. So one of the things we've been hearing lately is that, and we have numbers to prove this, I guess. Although they're not 100%, I think, accurate about people who are leaving Israel. people who in the past year, 2023, I think the numbers are 4. We don't have 24 yet, but we know, especially during the judicial reform and a little bit after October 7th, those are the numbers. There's been a lot of people leaving. I don't remember the exact numbers. So I don't want to tell people here, but more than usual. Not a tsunami, but that could happen. And so most of the
Well,
people that are leaving,
it's not, but, and this group was not representative of the Israeli population. It came from,
exactly, which is my point, that the people who are leaving are people with money and people with means and people who are will easily find jobs outside of Israel. So if someone's who's not to put people down, is a plumber in Israel, it's going to take him time to learn the plumbing industry. But someone who works in high tech on his computer, he could sit in Cyprus, for example, and just work the same exact job on his computer in Cyprus. And these are the people that Israel is in danger of losing. And so maybe give us a little bit about why you think this is happening. I mean, we spoke about it basically until now, but why is this happening now? And what can Israel do? I mean, politically, we spoke about why you think what's happening is dangerous, but is there anything that is politically viable for the government to do? I know we spoke about how bad they
no,
are
no,
with
no,
the Greek,
yeah,
but you know
and
what I mean.
understand the question. So let's start with, I'm from the generation where people who immigrate from Israel were nefolet nemushot, scums of the earth. Okay, so this is a label that
Tzchak Rabin.
That Rabin coined. Okay, so I did not intend to move to the US or leave the US. I came to school here, and one thing led to the other, and here I am 26 years later. And you know what? I do think that I serve Israel greatly by being here. And I think that many other people serve Israel. So I think that in one hand, it's actually important to have that because Israel has gained a lot of reputation by Israelis in
Yes.
high tech or other innovative areas that are doing good work here. So in that sense, it's good. The problem is indeed Israel also has to maintain its power. And if you are a parent, if you are a person like me, or if you are a person, exactly the people you discussed, what we have in mind is what kind of educations our kids get. What is the future of our kids? I'm a parent. Number one for me is my son, and nothing, everything else dwarfs in comparison to
Yes.
that. So if you are a parent, or if you're a person who comes from a sector that requires skills or knowledge or education, and not necessarily, it don't necessarily it have to be education, but it has to be a high skilled labor, you ask yourself, what's the future of my children? That's the number one cause. And what we have, again, I don't live in Israel, but hearing from my family, hearing friends, every parent has concerns about the decreasing level of education for a long, long time. And business people in Israel for a long time are very frustrated with the bureaucracy that is taking them down. Israel, in economic terms, Israel is an unexplained phenomenon. The growth in Israel makes no sense. I mean, it just defies gravity. But what happened was that it was knowledge base. The growth came from knowledge base. In Israel, what happened is that the entrepreneurial sector in Israel has been able to learned how to draw capital to fund it. That's nothing short of miracle. Nobody could even think. Even in hindsight, it looks implausible. The question is, can you keep this miracle keeps going? And if you don't have education, and if education is perceived the enemy, or if the government projecting that we don't need the good education or the educated people are the enemy, that's one thing. The other thing, if you want to run a business and you need to deal with a lot of bureaucracy, and some of the bureaucrats are hostile because they think that you are liberal from Tel Aviv or something like that. It's kind of it affects you. I don't think that anyone makes a decision to leave Israel because of one factor. It is always multiple factors. I think as a person who moved to the US, it's extraordinarily difficult. Most people return. It is so difficult. It is so, and it's not only language, it's culture and other things. It's social, networking, massive. This is pain. This is,
Yes.
talking about serious pain. So when people leave, and these people who live normally knows that. So I think that again, I don't have solutions for you. But one thing I can say is that some things have to change, and one thing would be education, different approach to education, And the other thing is that the deterioration of the public sector in Israel, which has been going on for quite a while.
What do you mean
And
by, let me just stop it just to understand. What do you mean by the deterioration of the public sector? You mean that the bureaucrats themselves have become less professional, less, business friendly, making it harder and different. What do you mean exactly?
so let me just start by saying that I use the word bureaucrats. I did not use it before October 7th. So, because my orientation is public policy, I'm pro regulation, I'm an antitrust person. Number one agency for me in anywhere, any country is the antitrust agency. However, the question is, can an agency secure good people or not? And that any agency would say, are the political appointees qualified individuals or not? We see that also in the United States. But if you do not have qualified individuals, if the head of an agency is a political appointee who is not a professional, that immediately leads to people to leave the agency. And if the conditions are difficult, people will leave the agency. It will be difficult to recruit new ones. The major challenge that I think Israeli businesses encounter is lack of professionalism. It's not necessarily evil or etc., but rather, you don't have a career professionals in the agencies because they do not retain them for a long time. That's the major problem. And then again, I mean, the other thing is that the other things coming in. It should be clear the private sector should be frustrated with the government. Otherwise, the government doesn't do its work.
Yes.
The question is whether but there's a big gap of how much frustration. And the
And
question
also
is, can you
why
put
you're
this?
frustrated. Because if you're frustrated because, let's say, taxes are a bit too high and the regulations are a little bit burdensome, but you understand basically why they're there, you're able to function. And also that you have like stability, so you know what and who and when and stuff like that. But I think also maybe just agree with me that or maybe not, that in Israel you don't have any of that. So you'll have people are angry at the government for the wrong reasons. They're angry because the bureaucracy is very slow and unprofessional. They're angry because, like you said, the people a lot of times don't really know the needs, don't really know why they're there and what they're doing. They're angry because regulations seem to have no logic a lot of times here. And I just read that, for example, to build a house, to get permits, you have to go to like 18 agencies just to sign. And sometimes the agencies have like different demands that are against each other. So you'll go to one place and do this, the other place, don't take that down. I spoke also, we had an episode with an Indian CEO who brings workers from India because after October 7th, Palestinians have not come to work mostly. And he just told me that he brings workers all over the world. He provides 30,000 workers a year around. And in Israel, it's the hardest to do. Every worker has to sign 70 pages to come to be accepted to Israel. And he said, like, to Dubai, they have to do 3 online, just sign online. England has 6 pages. One of them is health, so 5 for the business side. So I think people you are naturally stressed out because it's so difficult.
I would say more than that. Okay, this is the country we grew up in. I mean, I grew up in, and most Israelis grew up. You grew up in the United States, but we don't know anything else. So you accept, you accept it for what it is. The problem is that when it gets worse, that's where things become. And I think that we have seen that. So I did some work on content, Israeli content, and I was quite shocked to see how the standard of regulation of media companies in Israel, how it deteriorated. And it seemed to be deteriorated by strong political motives to weaken news in Israel. I was shocked by that. I was really shocked by that. You can hear stories until I saw that I couldn't believe my eyes.
What do you mean? Just could you give us an example?
So, the regulation of which entities can broadcast news in
Uh-huh.
Israel was created in an era before we had internet,
Mhm.
or even before we had significant cable TV. It has not been updated. So the regulatory framework in general, it is really complex. I have numerous elements, but when all these elements go together, the combination is that it's almost impossible to have an independent media entity in Israel. And I do believe that most media people are honest, are really care about the story. That has been my experience. I may agree or disagree with your opinion, but number one is reporting. Not and reporting. In the United States a distinction between reporting and opinions.
Commentators,
Is
yeah.
commentators is sharp. In Israel, there is no such distinction, which is it's bad. But again, I think that what I saw is if you want democracy, you better have media. Of course, if you're a politician, you better be angry about the media because otherwise they don't do their work. And it seems to me when I did that project, I was really concerned about that the policies seem to be intentionally designed to degrade the news sector in Israel, whether it is written media or whether it is broadcasted media. And this has been really troubling. As again, I come from the point of capital. There is no capitalism without democracy.
Yeah.
You kill democracy, you kill capitalism. So this is where things connected for me in the Israeli context.
Can I just ask you about your antitrust guy? You said what in Israel, a lot of we talk about in the popular media and even the economic media, a lot about how Israel is very bad. There's no competition in Israel in most sectors. The competition is very bad. It's lacking. I'm just giving you what people are saying, and I'll ask you about it. And in the last few years, especially, there's been attacks over and over, even by the minister of the economy, who is attacking the antitrust agency here over and over. He's saying he's demanding to fire her for a long time. He says she's not doing enough. As someone who this is his field, this is his forte, how much should we rely on an agency to make sure that there's competition like it should be? Because one thing that I do know is that a way to get competition in the country is to also allow other people to come and make it easier to do business, and that's the government's job, not the antitrust people's job. And the government seems to be, like we just said until now, making it very difficult to operate a business here. So what balance should we
Okay,
do?
so step by step. Number one, I have known all the head of the antitrust agency in Israel since the 90s. I Some of them are good friends, some of them I just know them, but I respect all of them. If we have professional disagreements, we take them as professional disagreements. One thing I can say about each one of them individually, the number one thing in mind is competition in Israel and households of Israeli households. They're deeply concerned about the cost of living. So any other argument is just wrong. This is their number one goal. The question you should ask is, why do they not succeed? Is it because they're unqualified or because there are other things? And there's a limit to how much they can do. So can the agency be better with more resources? Or if the conditions are such that they can draw other people? Absolutely. However, we should also keep in mind the specific condition in Israel. Low cost are always associated with scale. We want scale, and so efficiencies. And once you have scale in such a tiny country, you have an immediate increase in concentration. You cannot have numerous gas station companies, and they will be equally. You need to have scale. So the question is, we are going to have a concentrated economy. How do we, within this framework, how do we maximize competition?
Yes.
And again, I think that what we do see is that if you are a tycoon in Israel, what does it mean to be? Why are there tycoons in Israel? The reason is as follows: there are two factors that make things complicated. A, you don't have access to capital, unlike the US that you can raise capital from the market. And B, the regulatory complexity means that you need to have some political muscles.
Yeah.
Any country in the world, when you have these two conditions, you'll have conglomerates. And you have these conditions in Israel, and they are significant. So the more the more the bureaucracy is complicated and impenetrable, this is where you will see that. Capital markets in Israel, I think that Israelis have figured out how to raise money from the United States. Amazing, unbelievable. Okay, so but the notion that Israel will have deep capital markets, not realistic. It's 10 million people population, and they can have return on investing in global companies. So I think that the capital markets can be addressed in a different way. How Israeli companies can raise capital in the global economy. The other segment is the regulatory framework. That the more complex it is, these two conditions, capital and regulatory complexity, and this is much of what we see in Israel. Okay, and again, it should, as bad as it is, and it has always been. This is how I got into antitrust. I was annoyed by that. And it's a tiny, tiny country. The way it operates is makes no sense from the number of internet providers, the number of credit card it's for the size of the population is unbelievable. It is concentrated. The question is, with this concentration, perhaps there are markets perhaps that don't have to be so concentrated. Absolutely, some markets will be concentrated. How do you deal with them in the best possible way? And I don't think that there is such a thinking in the public sector. And it's not the job of the antitrust agency to deal with all these framework.
And I have to say one thing that gets me annoyed every time is that a lot of these, for the minister of the economy, it doesn't even matter who it is, but it just goes to show a point that it's his prerogative, his government's prerogative to cut and make a lot of this like burdensome regulation, to make it easier, to make it more simple and understandable. And instead of working hard and doing the hard work and fighting interest groups and doing all this stuff that he was voted to do if he cares about the people, it's so much easier to go and say, this regulator gets me so annoyed. It's her problem. She doesn't want to do what we need to do, and I'm going to fire her. And you also know that it'll take so much time to fire her, and therefore, throughout all this time, I won't have to do anything because I'll keep on saying it's her and I can't fire her. And it's so politically easy that it's annoying, and people should latch onto it and understand it. That yes, maybe sometimes, not even sometimes, a lot of times, bureaucrats will do things that politicians don't like. But that's not an excuse for you doing nothing. So, or close to nothing. I mean, it's so annoying. And you probably know this from other places and from Israel, watching what's happening. And it's just an example. The Ministry of Economy, we could talk about, the prime minister using, the courts and the legal system and the attorney general. Say it's so easy to blame other people and not do anything at the same time. So that gets me very annoyed. And I'm going to,
I want to refer to that because in our exchanges there was one insight you shared that actually I shared with my wife. It is basic, but I said, "Gosh,
yeah,
absolutely." So you said, politicians the only thing they want is power. I mean, there's nothing to talk about. This is the only they are driven by one thing, and the notion that you will have a politician who really care about the public or will have a deep interest in public policy not foreseeable in the near future. Sometimes it happens in different political social conditions. Right now, we don't have that. But I think that if you're a politician and you want to be described as success, like any other leader, you want to surround yourself by professionals. So regardless of the agency, your office should have real professionals as opposed to your niece, your cousin, and your neighbor. And that's what we see in Israel. And again, when we talked about it here, that you don't have the career professionals, those who are labeled unfairly bureaucrats, these people who dedicate their career to their lives to the public sectors, we should admire them. We should make sure that we have the best of them, and we don't have that. So they're kicked out of the government offices, which this is where all problems begin, and then it trickles down to the agencies.
yeah.
So I certainly agree with you, and I wish things would have been different. And but again, your insight was so fundamental and basic. Everyone think about it one way, but the way you just said it, and I talked with my wife and said, our problem is that we always think about how can we do things better, or why is it doesn't work this way. While for politicians is how do I get elected again? And this is the reality in which we live in all countries, in all democracies. Again, the,
I'll give
if
you a
we
funny story about that is that I used to work in the Likud, the Netanyahu's party, and one time we were at like some event. It was during the election, and we organized an event. As a I used to be part of what's called the liberals in the Likud, liberal in the European sense, capitalists, and now I don't think
liberal in
they,
the American sense,
yeah,
liberal in the traditional American sense.
classical liberals.
That's a
Yeah, so
classical liberals, yes,
So now they don't exist in the Likud, but at the time they
exactly.
did. Exactly. So we decided it wasn't like, I don't remember, like 5 elections ago, which was 2 years ago or something. But so we organized this meeting with Netanyahu and business leaders or small business people also, and uh, it was like 50 people, 60 people there. And so someone asked him, you've been talking so long about cutting regulation and making it easier to, why don't you do anything? And he said, what do you want me to do? I have so many people in the Likud that disagree with me, and I need their votes. And he was actually, I think, he was pretty honest at that point, and he said, I need their votes, and the government needs to function. And so, if you want, go into the Likud and get voted in, and maybe that's what people want. But if not, then the people who are voting in the Likud primaries don't want this. And so it's, what am I going to do? And I was like, what am I going to do? It's behind the
So
scenes.
let me just say something about politics. I'm not affiliated with any party. I will always
Yeah.
vote to the party which, in my mind, makes more sense. Okay, so I think I'm moderate here, and I would be moderate in. There's no such thing moderate in Israel, but I would vote to any party that makes sense. And one of the problems that we have seen is kind of the political structure of democracies has declined and there are many reasons for that, but Netanyahu is stuck in a party which he kind of his strategy to build a loyal base required such people, and now he's stuck with that base.
Yes,
This is point
exactly.
we made earlier, and it's not, again, not unique to Israel, but Israel has additional problems.
Yes, I agree.
And so this is where we are, and one would hope that I don't care about who is the identity of any government, etc. I just want people, somewhat decent. I really hope that there will be some to have some decency in them, and that they would really like to say, "I'm the minister of this office." At the end, I want people to know how good I am as a minister, as opposed to a TikToker or someone who's just making or just doing things or just making voices.
Professor
So
Orbach,
this is
you're
what we want.
fantasizing too much. That's never going to
I,
happen.
I, gr- I no, it will, as I said, it will actually, this is not the first time in history that we have populism is on the rise. So I started working on populism in 2016, actually. And I did research at the time, and it was so little written because populism was associated with early 20th century Nazi Germany, etc. And there was a sense that we've got rid of the problem. Well, we leave the problem in on steroids now. So it will decline, and hopefully faster than longer.
Well, Professor Orbach, one last question, but answer shortly because people will probably
Understand?
run away from our because it's going to be too long. But um, just short term wise, let's say in the next few months, the war will end. Um, things will start getting back to normal. Um, at some point, there'll be new elections here. I don't know what's going to happen. It doesn't even matter. How do you give us just the short term? How do you see the economy going in terms of short term after the war?
It will get much worse before it gets better. You have the sectors of all the people who serve in the reserves. They cannot. It is silly to think that they can go back to work. I mean, these guys were traumatized. So we have a massive chunk of people who are semi-functioning right now, but they have long-term damage.
Yeah.
So these things affect the economy, and in order to to fuel any economy, you need some kind of positive effect. You need some hope. That was what brings investments. And so it will get worse. The human capital in Israel, and let's be positive, the human capital in Israel is unmatched. And that's the number one thing every Israeli should remember, and every Israeli government should cherish. Keep the human capital,
Yes.
invest in the human capital. Unbelievable. This is really all a goyim. And I hope that we'll get there.
Yes, and in order for that to happen, people need to feel that they're welcome here. And like we said in the beginning, they need to feel no reason to run away, feel that they have a voice, and even if they didn't vote for people that are in the government now, that they do have that their concerns are taken under consideration. And I think that's so. I do say that one of the things that we've been hearing a lot of behind the scenes is the Abraham Accords going to the Saudis. So that could be one of the things you talk about optimism. If that happens, that could bring a sort of wave of new optimism, maybe, hopefully. But you're saying if nothing like that happens, nothing big and optimistic, we're going to look first at least in the near future, something not so good, and maybe in the end will come out from the end of the tunnel. But near future, we should be ready here in Israel for bad things or for a bad period of time.
unfortunately, I wish I could say something else. I wish I could say, oh, no, there is some probability. There isn't. The greatness of Israel will be measured by how fast Israel will start a real recovery.
Yeah.
And I think that for Israel, is the positive thing to remember is that indeed the quality of the individual will permit that. The question is whether we'll have the institutional structure to move to recovery as fast as possible.
Yes.
And, to support all these individuals who got harmed, traumatized by the war, because we want them to be productive. Setting aside that it's the right thing to do as a human beings, we need them, all of them. So there must be investment in that to go. And I really wish I could say, the end of the war, things will start, everything will, the sun will shine and there will be no shadow in Israel. I wish I could say that.
Yeah. Professor Orbach, I have to say that I enjoyed the conversation, but I came out of it very depressed. But maybe people will listen to conversations like ours and others, and we'll get, hopefully, politicians. I know politicians listen to me here. I've gotten, responses when I get them angry. So maybe they'll get angry and they'll realize that, it's time to change a little bit. So thank you so much for being with us.
I just want to, I don't want to say something positive. As an Israeli who lives so long outside the United States, there is no place like home. And that's something to say.
Yeah.
And so it's a real home and it has to be kept like that. And people should remember that that's what we have.
Yeah. And that it's everyone's home, not just whoever's in charge at given time. Professor Orbach, thank you so much for being with us. It was a pleasure. It was enlightening.
My pleasure.
And thank you so much. And thank you guys so much for being with us. Hold on, Professor Orbach. Guys, I'm not good at this, but donate to my Buy Me Coffee so we can keep this podcast going, and read my stuff at Globes, obviously, and wherever you guys can find me, and send me messages. I'll send Barak if you guys have any questions, comments that you want him to answer. And so I'll relay back to him, and then we'll write it in the comment section of the YouTube. So thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you on our next episode.
My pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to the Western Spirit Podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. See you next time.